Have you ever walked into a room where everyone assumed you didn't belong before you even opened your mouth? James Collins stood in the service bay of Ashford Prestige Motors with a microfiber cloth in his hand and grease under his fingernails that wouldn't come out no matter how hard he scrubbed. 20 years old. Junior at UC Berkeley studying mechanical engineering on a scholarship that covered tuition but left him scrambling for rent money every month. The summer heat made the shop floor shimmer, and sweat pooled at the small of his back as he worked the cloth across the Ferrari's flawless red paint. The car sat like an accusation. A 1962 Ferrari 250 GTO, one of 36 ever built, worth more than most people would see in 10 lifetimes. James was supposed to polish it, make it shine, keep his eyes on the paint and his thoughts to himself. That's what Donald Ashford paid him $15 an hour to do. Detail work. Grunt labor. The kind of job that let him tell his mother he was working in automotive, even if automotive meant washing cars while certified technicians handled the real work. But James's eyes kept drifting to the hydraulic lift 3 feet away, where another Ferrari, same model, different owner, sat with its engine bay open like a patient on an operating table. 4 technicians stood around it arguing in low voices about fuel delivery systems and pressure tolerances. They'd been arguing for 3 days. James had listened to every word while he polished chrome and vacuumed interiors and pretended not to understand what they were talking about. The problem was heat cycle degradation in the fuel line. Had to be. Everything they'd described, the intermittent hesitation, the pressure variance that disappeared when they tested it cold, the way the issue got worse as the engine reached operating temperature, pointed to the same diagnosis. James had seen it before on a neighbor's 1968 Alfa Romeo 2 years ago. Different car, same disease. Rubber aging from the inside out, invisible to the eye, impossible to catch with standard diagnostics. He could have told them, could have saved them 3 days of throwing parts at a problem they didn't understand. But James Collins was black, 20 years old, and holding a microfiber cloth instead of a wrench. In Donald Ashford's shop, that meant his job was to be invisible. The shop door opened. Donald Ashford himself, 52 years old, silver hair cut sharp as a knife blade, shoes that cost more than James made in a month. He moved through the service bay like he owned it, which he did, and every eye turned to track him. That kind of presence didn't come from skill. It came from family money and connections that ran 3 generations deep in the California luxury automotive world. Donald's gaze landed on James, standing too close to the lifted Ferrari, microfiber cloth hanging loose in his hand while he stared at the open engine bay. "Collins!" The voice cut through the shop noise like a blade. "Your job is detailing, not daydreaming. That engine is worth more than you'll make in your entire life. Get back to work." James dropped his eyes to the cloth in his hand, felt the weight of every technician's stare, felt the familiar heat in his chest that he'd learned to swallow down. "Yes, sir." Brian Carter, the lead technician, didn't bother lowering his voice. 38 years old, certified by 3 different automotive boards, 15 years at Ashford Motors climbing from apprentice to team leader. He leaned against the workbench with his arms crossed and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Kid probably thinks he can fix it because he watched some YouTube videos for his community college classes." James kept his head down, kept polishing, but the words came out before he could stop them. "Berkeley, sir. Mechanical engineering." Brian's smile sharpened. "Oh, affirmative action scholarship? Good for you. Still doesn't mean you understand Italian racing engines." The other technicians laughed. Not cruel laughter exactly, just the casual amusement of men who knew their place in the world and were comfortable reminding others of theirs. James bit the inside of his cheek until he tasted copper. 3 more hours until his shift ended. 3 more hours of being invisible while watching them chase the wrong problem with the wrong tools. What they didn't know, what nobody in this shop knew, was that James had spent the last 5 years learning from someone who'd forgotten more about Italian racing engines than Brian Carter would ever know. Joseph Martinelli, 76 years old, retired Scuderia Ferrari master technician living in Modena, Italy. They'd never met in person. Probably never would. But for 5 years, since James was 15 years old and desperate to understand why his neighbor's car had stumped every mechanic in Oakland, they'd exchanged emails about engine theory and diagnosis philosophy and the art of listening to what machines were trying to say. Joseph had taught him that credentials meant nothing. Attention meant everything, and right now everyone in this shop was paying attention to the wrong thing. James finished polishing the GTO in front of him and moved it carefully into the climate-controlled storage area where Ashford kept the cars worth more than houses. When he came back, the technicians were still arguing, still wrong. He grabbed a push broom and started sweeping the bay floor, working his way closer to their conversation without making it obvious. Fuel pressure's inconsistent, but only after the engine's been running 20 minutes or more. That was Marcus Chen, second-year tech, good with diagnostics when he bothered to think past what the computer told him. Brian shook his head. We've tested the pump 4 times. Pressure's perfect every time. Maybe the sensor's giving false readings when it heats up. Replaced the sensor yesterday. Same problem. They were circling the answer without seeing it. Testing components in isolation when the problem only appeared when the whole system was hot and under load. Classic mistake. James had made it himself once, 3 years ago, and Joseph had walked him through the logic in a patient email that James still had saved in a folder marked Essential Lessons. The shop door opened again. This time everyone stopped what they were doing. Robert Hayes walked like a man carrying weight that had nothing to do with his body. 68 years old, billionaire founder of Hayes Dynamics, one of the largest aerospace defense contractors in the country. $4 billion in personal wealth according to Forbes. Enough money to buy anything, fix anything, solve any problem that money could solve. Except this one. James had seen him 3 times over the past 2 weeks, always with the same hollow expression, like someone watching a loved one die slowly and being powerless to stop it. The Ferrari on the lift belonged to him, had belonged to his father before that, had taught 2 generations of Hayes men how to drive, how to trust mechanical perfection, how to feel connected to something that wouldn't die or leave or disappoint. And for 18 months, that car had been dying. Slowly, expensively, publicly. Every expert Robert Hayes had hired, every diagnostic center in 3 countries, every certified Ferrari specialist who'd sworn they could fix it, all of them had failed. $2.4 million spent. 0 results. Robert stopped beside the lift and stared up at the engine like he was looking at his father's grave. Brian straightened up, wiping his hands on a rag. Mr. Hayes, we're still working on the fuel delivery analysis. Should have some answers by end of week. Robert's laugh was bitter and tired. That's what you said last week, and the week before that. This is a complex problem, sir. The symptoms are intermittent, the diagnostics are inconclusive. Stop. Robert's voice was quiet, but it cut through Brian's explanation like a knife through paper. Just stop. I've heard this speech from you, from the team in Maranello, from the specialist in Munich, from everyone I've paid to fix this car, and it's still broken. He reached out and placed his palm flat against the Ferrari's fender. The gesture was gentle, intimate, like touching something fragile that might break if you weren't careful. My father bought this car in 1962, drove it home from the dealership in Modena, Italy, taught me to drive in it when I was 16, summer of 1972, back roads in California, just the 2 of us and this engine. He died 2 years later. Heart attack, 49 years old. No warning. This car was all I had left of him. The shop had gone completely silent. Even the ventilation system seemed to quiet down. I taught my son Michael to drive in this same car, same roads, same lessons my father taught me, tried to give him the same gift my father gave me. Michael died 15 years ago. Drunk driver, 23 years old. This car is all I have left of both of them. Robert's hand was shaking against the fender. And for 18 months I've watched it fail, watched every expert in the world try to save it and fail. Spent enough money to buy 10 of these cars and gotten nothing except excuses and explanations and promises that next time will be different. He dropped his hand and turned toward the door. "I'm donating it to the Peterson Museum. Let them figure it out or let it sit behind glass forever. I can't watch it die slowly anymore." Donald Ashford stepped forward, face arranged in an expression of professional sympathy. "Robert, that's probably the wisest decision. Some problems simply have no solutions. You've done everything possible." Robert stopped walking. His shoulders were bent like something inside him had broken. "Don't tell me this is wise. My father is in this car, my son is in this car, and I'm abandoning them both because I can't find anyone who knows how to listen to what it's trying to say." The words hit James in the chest like a physical blow, because he knew, had known for 3 days while he swept floors and polished chrome and stayed invisible, had known the moment he heard the technicians describe the symptoms. The car wasn't broken, it was tired, and it was screaming for help in a language nobody in this room understood. Joseph's voice echoed in his head from an email sent 2 years ago. "If you have knowledge and stay silent, you're complicit in failure." James set down the broom. His hands were steady even though his heart was trying to punch through his ribs. 3 more hours until rent was due. His mother working night shifts at the hospital, coming home with her feet swollen and her back aching, sacrificing everything so he could chase an engineering degree that people like Brian Carter assumed he didn't deserve. He could stay silent, keep his head down, keep the $15 an hour job that was beneath him but better than nothing, graduate in 2 years and get out of here and never think about this moment again. Or he could speak. Robert Hayes was 5 steps from the door. "Mr. Hayes." James's voice didn't shake, didn't waver, just carried across the service bay clear and steady and impossible to ignore. "I know what's wrong with your car." The silence that crashed through the shop was absolute. Total. The kind of silence that comes right before everything changes. Then Brian Carter started laughing. Deep belly laughs that doubled him over. "Oh, this is rich. This is beautiful. The detail kid thinks he can solve what stumped Ferrari factory engineers." Marcus joined in. "Dude, you're killing me. What's next? You gonna tell us you learned everything from YouTube?" Donald Ashford's face went crimson. He took 3 fast steps toward James, voice tight with fury. "Collins, you're fired. Get out, now." But Robert Hayes had turned around, and he was looking at James like a man who'd been drowning and just spotted something that might be a lifeline or might be a hallucination but was worth reaching for either way. "Wait." Robert raised one hand and the shop went quiet again. "Let him speak." Donald's jaw clenched. "Robert, he's a part-time detailer, a college student. He has 0 credentials, 0 training, 0 qualifications whatsoever. This is embarrassing for everyone." "Donald." Robert's voice was soft, but there was steel underneath it. "Your facility has cost me $2.4 million over 18 months with 0 results. I can spare 5 minutes for someone new." He looked at James, really looked at him, not the way Donald looked, seeing skin color and age and a paycheck too small to matter, not the way Brian looked, seeing competition to be dismissed. Robert Hayes looked at James Collins and seemed to be searching for something he desperately needed to find. "What's your name?" "James Collins, sir." "And you think you know what's wrong with my car?" James's throat was dry, but his mind was crystal clear. 5 years of emails from Joseph Martinelli had prepared him for this exact moment. Every lesson, every principle, every diagnostic framework. "I need to hear the engine run to confirm, but based on the symptoms your technicians have been describing, the intermittent hesitation, the pressure variance that only appears after extended operation, the way it gets worse as the engine reaches operating temperature, I believe it's heat cycle degradation in the fuel line section near the exhaust manifold. The rubber has aged internally over 62 years of thermal expansion and contraction. External inspection won't reveal it because the damage is microscopic and internal. But when the engine heats up, that section expands and the internal diameter narrows just enough to reduce fuel pressure by a fraction that a modern computer won't flag as abnormal but an old carbureted system can't compensate for. The shop was so quiet James could hear his own heartbeat. Brian Carter found his voice first. Correspondence? You mean you emailed some old guy in Italy? Kid, that's not training, that's fantasy. I've been a certified Ferrari technician for 15 years. I've worked on these cars since before you were born, and you're telling me, I'm telling you that you've been testing components in isolation when the problem only manifests in the complete system under thermal load over time. James kept his eyes on Robert Hayes. You've been listening to computers instead of listening to the machine. Computers average data. Computers smooth out anomalies. Computers tell you what's supposed to happen based on normal parameters. But this car is 62 years old. Nothing about it is normal anymore. It needs someone willing to pay attention to what's actually happening instead of what the diagnostic readout says should be happening. Robert Hayes studied James's face for a long moment. Whatever he was looking for, he seemed to find it. Donald, I'd like to give this young man a chance to prove his theory. Donald's face went from crimson to purple. This is insane. You cannot be serious. He's a college kid who washes cars for beer money. He's the only person in this room who's given me a coherent explanation that matches every symptom. Robert's voice was firm now. Final. I'll take insane over expensive failure. Donald saw his authority crumbling, saw 18 months of lucrative repair contracts and billable hours circling the drain because a 20-year-old kid with a broom had made his entire team look incompetent. When men like Donald Ashford felt their power slipping, they didn't surrender. They escalated. Fine. The word came out clipped and cold. If Mr. Hayes wants to entertain this circus, we'll do it properly. I'm calling Ferrari North America, the Automotive Certification Board, Industry Press. We'll arrange a formal evaluation. He turned to James with a smile that was all edges and no warmth. 1 week from today, formal setting, qualified witnesses. You'll have 90 minutes to diagnose the problem, explain your reasoning, and propose a solution. When you fail, and you will fail, Mr. Collins, because this is not a game and this is not YouTube, it will be documented, recorded, published. I'll make certain that every garage in California knows you're a fraud who wasted a billionaire's time with delusions and correspondence courses. The threat hung in the air like poison gas. James felt it wrap around his chest and squeeze. This wasn't about proving a diagnosis anymore. This was about Donald protecting his reputation by destroying someone who'd made him look bad. And Donald had resources, connections, the ability to make good on every word. Patricia Collins worked 60-hour weeks as a night shift nurse at Oakland General, came home with feet so swollen she could barely walk, paid rent on a one-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood where gunshots were background noise, did all of it so her son could chase an engineering degree that everyone except her seemed to think he didn't deserve. If James got blacklisted from automotive work, if this blew up in his face, if Donald made good on his threat, his mother couldn't afford for him to lose this job, couldn't afford for him to get a reputation as someone who didn't know his place. But Joseph's words echoed louder than Donald's threats. Every machine tells you what's wrong. The only question is whether you're humble enough to listen. And James had been listening. For 3 days. For 5 years. For his entire life. While other people talked and assumed and dismissed, he'd been paying attention. Learning. Preparing for a moment he hadn't known was coming, but recognized the instant it arrived. He looked at Robert Hayes, saw a man who'd lost his father and his son, and was about to lose the only thing connecting him to both of them. Saw someone who deserved truth more than James deserved safety. "I'll be ready, sir." The words came out steady, confident, like he had any idea what he was doing, like he wasn't a 20-year-old college student who'd just bet his entire future on 90 minutes and a diagnosis learned through emails from a man he'd never met. Donald's smile sharpened. "Excellent. 1 week. Don't be late, Mr. Collins. Wouldn't want to waste everyone's time." He turned and walked toward his office, already pulling out his phone, already making calls, already setting up the execution. Robert Hayes stepped closer to James. Up close, the man looked older than 68. Looked like someone who'd been carrying grief for so long he'd forgotten what it felt like to set it down. "Son, I don't know you. Don't know if you're brilliant or delusional or something in between, but you're the first person in 18 months who's looked at that car and seen something more than a paycheck." He paused. "What made you speak up?" James thought about his father. Killed on a construction site when James was 9 years old. Crushed by equipment that should have been inspected and wasn't. Died building something he'd never see finished. Died because someone with power had cut corners and someone without power had paid the price. Because staying silent when you know the answer isn't humble, sir. It's cowardice. Robert's eyes went bright. He reached out and gripped James's shoulder. 1 week, 90 minutes. Everything I have left of my father and my son is riding on whether you're as good as you think you are. His grip tightened. "Don't let me down." Then he was gone, walking out of the shop into afternoon sunlight that turned the parking lot into a grid of shadows and glare. Brian Carter waited until the door closed before speaking. His voice had lost the mockery. Now it was just cold. "You just ended your career, kid. You know that, right? Donald's going to bury you. Ferrari North America's going to tear you apart. And when they're done, you'll be lucky to get hired changing oil at Jiffy Lube." James picked up his broom, went back to sweeping, but his hands were shaking now that the adrenaline was fading and reality was setting in. He'd just challenged the entire automotive establishment, put his reputation, his future, his mother's sacrifices on the line. For what? For a diagnosis based on emails from a man living 6,000 miles away. For a theory he'd only proven once, on a different car, with Joseph's guidance every step of the way. 7 days until he had to stand in front of certified experts and prove he belonged in a room he'd never been invited to enter. 7 days to prepare for 90 minutes that would define the rest of his life. The bay door opened and Marcus Chen walked over, voice low. "You're either the bravest person I've ever met or the dumbest. I honestly can't tell which." James kept sweeping. "Maybe both. Donald's serious about blacklisting you. He's got connections everywhere. You fail this evaluation, you won't work automotive in this state again." "I know. So why do it? Why not just keep your head down, graduate, get out of here? Why risk everything on a car you've never even touched?" James stopped sweeping, looked at the Ferrari on the lift, thought about Robert Hayes's face when he talked about his father and son, thought about his own father, dead in a construction accident because someone chose profit over safety and silence over speaking up. Because if I can help and I don't, then I'm part of the problem. Marcus studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Good luck, man. You're going to need it." The rest of the shift passed in a blur. James finished his work, clocked out, drove his 10-year-old Honda Civic across the bay to Oakland, parked in front of the apartment building where he'd lived his entire life, climbed stairs that smelled like old cooking grease and mildew, unlocked a door that stuck in the frame because the building was settling and the landlord wouldn't fix anything that wasn't actively on fire. His mother was awake. She wasn't supposed to be. Night shift nurse meant sleeping during the day. But Patricia Collins sat at their kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold in her hands and an expression on her face that said someone had called her. "Mama, Donald Ashford called me." Her voice was quiet, dangerously quiet. "Said my son had a mental breakdown at work today. Said he's arranging a formal evaluation to help you understand the limits of your knowledge before you hurt yourself or someone else. Said he was being generous by not pressing charges for fraud." James set down his keys. "That's not what happened." "Then tell me what did happen. Because I just spent 30 minutes on the phone with a man who owns half of San Francisco's luxury automotive industry telling me my son is delusional and needs psychiatric help." So James told her. Everything. The Ferrari, the diagnosis, Robert Hayes and his dead father and dead son, the challenge, the 90 minutes, the stakes. Patricia listened without interrupting. When he finished, she set down her coffee cup with a click that sounded loud in the small kitchen. "You risked your job, your career, our rent money, for a car." "For a person, Mama. Robert Hayes was going to give up. And I know what's wrong. I can fix it." "You know." Patricia's voice was sharp now. "You're 20 years old, baby. You've been studying engineering for 2 years. You work part-time washing cars. And you think you know more than people who've been doing this their whole lives?" The words hurt worse coming from her than from Brian Carter or Donald Ashford, because his mother had sacrificed everything for him. Every double shift, every swollen foot, every time she came home too tired to eat. All of it so he could have opportunities she'd never had. "Joseph taught me. Joseph is a man you've never met who lives in Italy and sends you emails. Baby, I love that you're passionate about this. I love that you're smart and dedicated, but passion doesn't pay rent. And if Donald Ashford blacklists you, how are you going to finish school? How are we going to—" She stopped, pressed her palms against her eyes. Her shoulders shook. James crossed the kitchen and knelt beside her chair, took her hands in his. "Mama, listen to me. Dad died building something he believed in. You've told me that story 100 times. How he knew that site wasn't safe. How he spoke up and got ignored. How he went back to work anyway because we needed the money. And he died because someone with power made a choice and someone without power paid the price." Patricia's face crumpled. "I have power now, Mama. Not money power, not connection power, but knowledge power. And if I stay silent when I know the answer, then I'm no different than the people who ignored Dad. I'm choosing safety over truth, and I can't do that, not when someone's counting on me." Patricia pulled her hands free and stood up, walked to the window, stared out at Oakland sprawling below them in the late afternoon light. When she spoke again, her voice was different, steadier. "Your father was the best man I ever knew. Stubborn as hell. Couldn't walk past someone who needed help without stopping. Got him killed in the end." She turned to face James. "You're just like him. God help us both." She crossed the kitchen and pulled him into a hug that smelled like hospital antiseptic and the lavender lotion she used on her hands. 7 days to prepare. Don't waste them. And James, don't you dare lose." That night, James sat at his laptop and opened his email, scrolled back 5 years to the first message he'd ever sent to Joseph Martinelli. Subject line, "Question about Alfa Romeo fuel delivery system from a kid who doesn't know what he's doing." Joseph's response had come 3 days later. "The fact that you admit you don't know is the first sign of wisdom. Ask your questions." 5 years of correspondence, hundreds of emails, thousands of hours learning diagnosis philosophy and engine theory and the art of paying attention to what machines were trying to say. Joseph had never asked for money, never asked for anything except that James take the knowledge seriously and use it to help people, not just to prove how smart he was. James started a new email. Subject line, "I need your help." He explained the situation, the Ferrari, the challenge, the 90 minutes, the stakes, typed until his fingers cramped and his eyes burned, sent it at 2 a.m. California time, which meant 11 a.m. in Modena. Joseph's response came 6 hours later. "James, you have learned well. But this evaluation is not about impressing experts or proving theories. It is about listening to a machine that is asking for help. Trust your ears, not their expectations. Trust your training, not their credentials. Remember, every engine speaks. The only question is whether you are humble enough to hear it. I am proud of you for having courage to speak when silence was safer. Now prove you have wisdom to listen when others are shouting. You can do this. You were born to do this. Joseph." James read the email 3 times. Then he opened his files and pulled up every technical manual for the Ferrari 250 GTO he could find. Specifications, schematics, fuel delivery diagrams, carburetor settings, ignition timing charts. He'd studied all of this before, but now he studied it like his life depended on it. Because it did. 7 days became 6. 6 became 5. James worked his shifts at Ashford Motors in a fog of exhaustion and adrenaline. Donald made sure everyone knew about the upcoming evaluation, made sure the technicians treated James like a curiosity or a joke. Brian Carter started a betting pool on how quickly James would fail. Marcus Chen refused to participate but didn't tell them to stop. On day 4, James got an email from his engineering professor at Berkeley. Subject line, regarding recent events. Mr. Collins, I've been made aware that you're participating in some kind of automotive challenge that's attracted industry attention. While I appreciate your enthusiasm, I strongly advise you to reconsider. Failure in such a public forum could reflect poorly on the department and jeopardize your academic standing. This is not the appropriate venue for a student to be representing the university. Please withdraw before you embarrass yourself and this institution. Professor Richard Morrison, Department of Mechanical Engineering, UC Berkeley. James deleted the email without responding. On day 5, his phone rang at midnight. Number he didn't recognize. He answered anyway. James Collins? A woman's voice. Professional. Cold. Yes? This is Linda Nash, Ferrari North America. I'm calling to confirm your participation in the evaluation scheduled for tomorrow. I want to make absolutely certain you understand what you're agreeing to. This is a formal diagnostic assessment overseen by certified professionals. Your findings will be recorded, analyzed, and published in industry documentation. If your diagnosis is incorrect or your methodology is flawed, that information becomes part of your permanent professional record. Do you understand? Yes, ma'am. Mr. Collins, I've reviewed your background. You're a college student with no professional certifications, no formal training, no documented experience in vintage Ferrari systems. Donald Ashford has made serious allegations about your competence and mental stability. Kenneth Porter from the Automotive Engineering Board specifically requested that I confirm you're not being coerced or manipulated into this evaluation. So I'm asking you directly. Are you certain you want to proceed? James thought about Robert Hayes, about his father and son, about a car that was dying while people with credentials and experience stood around making excuses. Yes, ma'am. I'm certain. Silence on the line. Then, your confidence is either admirable or delusional. I suppose we'll find out which tomorrow. 9 a.m. sharp. Don't be late. She hung up. James didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. Lay in bed staring at the ceiling while his mind ran through diagnostic procedures and pressure calculations and every possible thing that could go wrong. At 4 a.m. he gave up and made coffee. At 5 his mother came out of her bedroom already dressed for her shift. She didn't say anything, just pulled him into a hug and held on tight. Your daddy died building something he believed in. Her voice was fierce. You're his son. Don't back down from what you know is true. Then she was gone. Out the door into darkness. Off to another 12-hour shift at the hospital where she'd sacrifice her body so he could have a future that people like Donald Ashford and Professor Morrison and Linda Nash thought he didn't deserve. James showered, dressed in jeans and his Berkeley hoodie because he didn't own anything nicer that wasn't covered in grease stains. Drove across the bay as the sun came up over the Oakland Hills and turned San Francisco into something that looked like it was made of gold. Ashford Prestige Motors looked different at 8:45 in the morning. The service bay had been transformed, folding chairs arranged in rows like a courtroom, the Ferrari positioned under harsh lights on the hydraulic lift, a digital timer mounted on the wall ready to count down 90 minutes. This wasn't an evaluation. This was a public execution. The witnesses were already arriving. 12 Ashford technicians filled the first 2 rows, most of them smirking. 5 automotive journalists with cameras and notepads. Linda Nash from Ferrari North America in a designer suit that probably cost more than James's car. Kenneth Porter from the engineering board, 62 years old, former chief engineer at GM, looking at his watch like he had better places to be. Robert Hayes sat alone in the back row, looked like he hadn't slept in days. And in the far corner, pressed against the wall like she was trying to disappear, Patricia Collins stood with her purse clutched in both hands and her lips moving in silent prayer. Donald Ashford walked to the front of the room, smiled at the journalists. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for attending this unusual evaluation. We're here to witness Mr. James Collins's claim that he can diagnose a problem that has defeated certified professionals worldwide, a problem that represents 18 months of documented diagnostic work by some of the finest automotive engineers in 3 countries. He gestured toward James like a ringmaster introducing the sideshow. Mr. Collins is 20 years old. He has no professional certifications, no formal training beyond his current undergraduate coursework. His automotive experience consists of part-time detailing work and, as he claims, email correspondence with a retired technician in Italy. Pause for effect. Let that sink in. He will have 90 minutes to identify the malfunction in Mr. Hayes's 1962 Ferrari 250 GTO, explain his diagnostic reasoning, and propose a solution. When he fails, and the statistical probability of success is 0.3% based on the complexity of the problem and his lack of qualification, he has agreed to issue a public apology for wasting the time and resources of everyone in this room. Furthermore, his failure will be documented in industry publications as a cautionary example of the importance of proper credentials and professional training. Donald's smile was all teeth and no warmth. Mr. Collins, you have one final opportunity to withdraw. No shame in admitting you're in over your head. We can end this now, preserve what's left of your reputation, and move forward with actual qualified diagnosticians. James looked at Robert Hayes, saw a man who'd already lost everything that mattered, waiting to see if he was about to lose the last piece. Then James looked at his mother, saw a woman who'd sacrificed everything she had betting on her son's potential. I'm ready. The words came out steady, strong, like he believed them. Donald's smile faded to something colder. Very well. The timer will begin when you approach the vehicle. You have 90 minutes starting now. The digital clock began its countdown. 90 minutes. 89 minutes 59 seconds. 89 minutes 58 seconds. James walked toward the Ferrari. Every eye in the room tracked his movement. The journalists leaned forward with pens ready. Brian Carter whispered something to the tech beside him and they both laughed. Kenneth Porter checked his watch again, already convinced this was a waste of time he'd never get back. But James didn't reach for tools, didn't open diagnostic equipment, didn't rush. He walked around the car slowly, studying it from every angle, the way Joseph had taught him 5 years ago in an email titled, "Before you touch anything, look." Looking wasn't the same as seeing. Most people glanced at problems and assumed they understood. Real diagnosticians observed until the machine revealed itself. The Ferrari sat under the lights like something caught between life and death. 62 years old, paint still flawless, chrome still bright. But something inside was failing in a way that computers couldn't measure and experts couldn't find. James placed his palm flat against the fender, felt the metal cool and smooth under his hand, crouched down to examine the undercarriage, rose and circled to the other side, closed his eyes and just breathed, listened to the ambient noise of the shop, the ventilation system, the murmur of voices, the click of cameras. Brian Carter's voice cut through it all. What's he doing? Meditating? Maybe he should burn some sage, really get the spiritual vibe going. Laughter rippled through the technicians. James opened his eyes and looked directly at Brian. I'm listening. Something you stopped doing the moment you got your certification. The laughter died. Brian's face flushed red, but he didn't respond. James turned to the room. I need someone to start the engine. Marcus Chen moved to the driver's seat without being asked. The key turned. The V12 roared to life. 12 cylinders breathing in perfect mechanical harmony. To most ears in that room it sounded flawless. Perfect. Exactly the way a Ferrari was supposed to sound. James closed his eyes again, tilted his head slightly, stood completely still. 10 seconds passed. 20. 30. Kenneth Porter shifted in his seat. Linda Nash made a note on her pad. Donald Ashford's smile grew wider. 45 seconds, a full minute. Then James's eyes snapped open. There. Did you hear that? Confusion spread through the room. Nobody had heard anything unusual. Brian challenged, Hear what? It sounds flawless. James shook his head. The movement was small but definitive. No. It sounds almost perfect. And almost perfect is a cry for help that everyone's been ignoring. He walked to where Donald stood. I need an analog fuel pressure gauge. The kind from the 1960s with a needle, not a digital display. Brian crossed his arms. We have a $65,000 diagnostic computer system, state of the art. And you want antique equipment? Your $65,000 computer has been averaging 18 months of wrong answers. I'll try something different. Donald's jaw tightened. He nodded to one of the junior techs. Storage room. See what old equipment we still have. It took 20 minutes to find the gauge. Dusty, forgotten, buried beneath modern diagnostic tools that had failed to solve anything. The tech brought it out, looking skeptical. James took it and examined the gauge carefully. The glass face was scratched. The needle moved freely when he tapped it. The fittings were standard quarter-inch NPT. Perfect. He moved to the Ferrari and located the fuel line. His hands were steady as he connected the analog gauge. The movements were practiced, confident, hands that had done this procedure 100 times in his mind following Joseph's detailed email instructions. 73 minutes remaining. Start the engine again. Marcus turned the key. The V12 sang. James watched the analog needle settle at 4.5 psi, exactly within specification for a 1962 fuel system. Everyone watched. 5 minutes. The needle held steady. 10 minutes. Still steady. Brian smirked. Marcus checked his phone. Kenneth Porter looked at his watch for the 4th time. 15 minutes. 18 minutes. 20 minutes. Brian's voice dripped with satisfaction. Looks perfect to me. What a surprise. James raised one finger. Wait. 22 minutes. 24. The engine hummed. The needle stayed locked at 4.5 psi. Then, at minute 26, it happened. The needle dipped. Barely. A movement so small that half the people in the room missed it entirely. Then it recovered. James pointed. There. Did you see that? Linda Nash was the first to respond. She'd been watching the gauge with professional focus. I saw something, a tiny fluctuation, maybe half a pound. 0.4 psi. James kept his eyes on the gauge. Less than half a pound of pressure for approximately 2 seconds. Donald scoffed. That's nothing. That's within normal tolerance for any fuel system. Minor variations are expected. James turned to face him. This was the moment. Everything he'd learned from Joseph, everything he understood about machines and heat and time, everything that separated knowledge from credentials. In a modern fuel-injected engine, you're correct, sir. The computer compensates for minor variations automatically, adjusts the fuel mixture in real time. The driver never notices. He gestured toward the Ferrari. But this is not a modern engine. This is a 1962 carbureted system. No computer, no automatic compensation. It expects absolutely consistent fuel pressure. That 0.4 psi drop creates a momentary lean condition, not enough to trigger any warning, not enough to register on digital diagnostics that average their readings over time. Pause. Let it sink in. But enough for the engine to stumble, to hesitate, and sometimes, when conditions align perfectly wrong, to stall completely. Linda Nash was writing furiously. Kenneth Porter had stopped checking his watch and was leaning forward in his seat. Brian found his voice. Okay, interesting theory, but what's causing the pressure drop? We've tested every component in the fuel system. The pump is perfect. The filter is new. The lines have been inspected multiple times. I know. I read all your service records. Donald flinched. Those records were supposed to be confidential. James continued. Every component tests perfectly when examined in isolation. So it's not a broken part. It's a tired part. Something that works fine when cold, tests fine when you examine it separately, but fails when the entire system is hot, under load, over extended time. He began pacing, working through the logic out loud the way Joseph had taught him. Something that changes with heat, something that degrades over thermal cycles, something invisible to standard inspection. James stopped pacing and looked at the Ferrari. I need to get under the car. 61 minutes remaining. James dropped to the concrete floor and slid under the Ferrari. His Berkeley hoodie scraped against the ground. The overhead lights disappeared and he was in shadows beneath a $70 million machine, searching for a problem hiding in plain sight. His voice echoed from underneath. "Flashlight, please." Someone handed one down. James traced the fuel line with his fingertips, inch by inch, from the tank toward the engine bay, following the routing that 62 years of vibration and heat had made permanent. His hand stopped at a section near the exhaust manifold. He examined it with the flashlight. The rubber line looked perfect. No visible cracks, no obvious wear, no damage that would fail any inspection. It would pass every test that Donald's team had run, would look fine on any diagnostic report. But James knew better, because Joseph had taught him that the most dangerous failures were the ones you couldn't see. He slid out from under the car. His hoodie was now gray with concrete dust. His jeans had grease stains at the knees. He looked like exactly what Donald had accused him of being, a kid playing mechanic who didn't belong in this room, except his eyes were bright with certainty. "This section of fuel line is original, from 1962, 62 years old." Brian shrugged. "Original components are valuable in vintage cars, part of the authenticity. We don't replace things that aren't broken." James met his eyes. "It's not broken. It's tired. There's a difference." He walked over to where Linda Nash sat with her notebook. "Ma'am, may I explain what I believe is happening?" She nodded. Her skepticism had shifted to something else. Curiosity, maybe. Or the recognition that this wasn't playing out the way Donald had promised. James took a breath and began. "This fuel line runs within 2 inches of the exhaust manifold. Every time the engine operates, that section heats to approximately 180 to 200 degrees Fahrenheit. Then the engine stops and it cools to ambient temperature. 62 years of this cycle, thousands upon thousands of times. The rubber expands when hot, contracts when cold, over and over." He held up his hands, demonstrating expansion and contraction. "The external surface still looks perfect because rubber degrades from the inside out. You can inspect it visually and it appears fine. You can pressure test it cold and it performs to specification. But the internal structure has been compromised. Microscopic cracks, loss of elasticity, breakdown of the polymer chains that give rubber its flexibility." Linda was nodding slowly. Kenneth Porter had pulled out his own notebook. "When the engine heats up during operation, that section of fuel line heats up too. The degraded rubber expands. The internal diameter narrows by a fraction of a millimeter. Not enough to block fuel flow, not enough to trigger any alarm, but enough to reduce pressure by 0.4 psi. James pinched his fingers together to show the scale. Then the engine cools down, the rubber contracts, returns to its normal state. You test it and everything checks out perfectly. The problem disappears until the next time the thermal cycle repeats." The room had gone completely silent. Even the journalists had stopped whispering. From the back row, a voice spoke for the first time since the evaluation began. Robert Hayes, quiet but clear. "How do you prove it?" Kenneth Porter echoed the question. "Even if this theory is correct, how do you demonstrate that this specific section of line is the cause? How do you prove it's not something else?" James had been waiting for this question, had planned for it, had mental rehearsed his answer 100 times. "I can prove it right now. 53 minutes remaining. I need a length of modern fuel-rated hose, same diameter as the original, same approximate length. I'm going to create a temporary bypass around the suspect section. If I'm right, the pressure fluctuation will stop completely. If I'm wrong, the problem will persist, and you'll all know I was guessing." Donald saw his last chance. "Absolutely not. You want to modify a $70 million vehicle based on a theory? Based on guesswork from a college student who's never touched this car before today?" Robert stood up. His voice was firm, final. "Donald, he's not guessing. He's diagnosing. Let him proceed." Donald's face went from red to purple. But Robert Hayes owned a $4 billion company, and Donald Ashford ran a repair shop. The power dynamic was clear. Get him whatever he needs. Marcus brought the hose. Modern synthetic rubber rated for high-temperature fuel systems. James measured it carefully. Cut it to exact length with a utility knife. The cuts were clean and precise. Then he went to work. What happened next made Brian Carter's jaw drop. James's hands moved with a precision that seemed impossible for someone his age, someone with no professional certifications, someone who'd supposedly learned everything through emails. He routed the bypass hose around the suspect's section, connected it with brass fittings, secured it with proper fuel-rated clamps. Every movement was confident, practiced, professional. In Joseph's garage, 6,000 miles away, the old man had described these procedures in meticulous detail across dozens of emails, had photographed every step, had made James visualize the process until it was burned into his muscle memory, and now those virtual repetitions were paying off in real precision. 8 minutes later, the bypass was complete. Brian examined the work despite himself. The connections were solid. The routing was clean. The installation was professional grade. This is actually good work. James wiped his hands on his already ruined jeans. Start the engine. Marcus turned the key. The V12 roared to life. The analog gauge needle settled at 4.5 psi. Everyone watched. 5 minutes. Needle steady. 10 minutes. Needle steady. 15 minutes. Needle steady. 20 minutes. The point where problems typically appeared. Needle steady. 25 minutes. 30 minutes. 35 minutes. Not a single fluctuation. Not a single dip. Not a single hesitation. The engine ran perfectly. James let the silence stretch. Let the weight of what they were witnessing settle into every person in that room. Then he moved to the Ferrari and began removing the bypass. "What are you doing?" Linda Nash's voice was sharp. "Proving it." James worked quickly. 3 minutes later, the original fuel line was reconnected. The bypass hose lay on the workbench. "Start the engine again." Marcus hesitated, looked at Donald. Donald's face was stone. "Do it." The V12 roared. The needle held at 4.5 psi. They waited. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes. At 22 minutes, the needle dipped, recovered, dipped again. At 26 minutes, the engine stumbled. A hesitation that everyone in the room could now hear because they knew what to listen for. A microscopic pause in the mechanical symphony that had been invisible before James taught them the language. James signaled Marcus to shut it down. The engine died. The sudden silence felt enormous. James turned to face the room. 20 years old in a dirty hoodie and stained jeans, standing in front of certified experts and industry journalists and engineering board chairmen who'd all expected him to fail. The repair requires a $40 fuel line and approximately 30 minutes of labor. He let that number hang in the air, let it contrast with 18 months and $2.4 million. This car has been to every Ferrari expert in the world. 5 service centers across 3 countries. You spent $2.4 million looking for a problem that was hiding in 60 cents worth of rubber. His voice stayed calm. No gloating, no anger, just fact. The line wasn't broken. It was just old, just tired. It was asking for help in a language that required patience and attention to understand. He looked directly at Donald Ashford, and nobody was humble enough to listen. Linda Nash rose to her feet. Her voice carried through the stunned silence with the weight of 25 years in the industry behind it. In my entire career at Ferrari North America, I have never witnessed a diagnosis this elegant from someone this young. This isn't just competence. This is artistry. She turned to James. We have an emerging engineer program, full sponsorship through master's degree, summer internship position in our heritage division starting immediately. When you graduate from Berkeley, you have a guaranteed job offer. We don't let talent like this walk away. James looked at his mother in the corner. Patricia had both hands pressed against her mouth, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you, ma'am. I'd like that very much." Kenneth Porter stood. The former GM chief engineer who'd been checking his watch and radiating irritation now looked at James with something approaching respect. "Mr. Collins, I owe you an apology. I assumed this was a publicity stunt, a waste of time arranged by someone with more confidence than competence. Instead, I've witnessed the finest piece of diagnostic reasoning I've seen in a decade." He extended his hand. "When you finish at Berkeley, contact me. General Motors always needs engineers who can think the way you do. Engineers who understand that machines are more than assemblies of parts. They're systems that communicate if you're willing to listen." James shook his hand. The grip was firm, respectful, equal to equal. But Robert Hayes hadn't moved from his seat in the back row. His eyes were locked on the Ferrari. His hands gripped his knees like he was trying to hold something together that wanted to fall apart. "James?" The billionaire's voice was rough, raw. "I need to drive it, and I want you with me." Donald stepped forward immediately. "Robert, we haven't conducted a full safety inspection after the modification. The liability implications alone—" Robert's voice cut like a blade. "Donald, the boy did a diagnostic bypass on a fuel line, not experimental surgery on a human being. I'm driving my car, and James rides with me. That's not a request." The door was already open. Robert walked toward it, toward the Ferrari that held his father and his son in memory and metal, toward the machine that had been dying for 18 months and might, just might, be about to live again. James followed. Behind them, the room erupted in whispers and camera clicks and the sound of journalists calling their editors. The Ferrari's door opened with a whisper of precision engineering. Robert slid into the driver's seat. The leather was worn soft by 6 decades of use, shaped by his father's body and his son's body, and now his own. James took the passenger seat, the same seat where Robert's father had sat, where Michael had sat, where ghosts lived in the stitching and the curve of the cushion. Robert's hand shook as he turned the key. The V12 sang. For the first time in 18 months, Robert smiled at the sound. Not a big smile, not a happy smile, but a smile that said something broken might be healing. They pulled out of the service bay into San Francisco afternoon. The crowd watched them disappear around the corner. Nobody spoke, nobody moved. They just watched until the Ferrari was gone. Robert's route was deliberate. He drove to every place the car had failed him, every hill where the engine had stumbled, every intersection where it had stalled, every road that had turned driving from joy into dread. Pacific Heights, the steepest residential streets in the city, grades that punished weak engines and exposed hidden flaws without mercy. The Ferrari climbed. No hesitation, no stumble, just power flowing smooth and consistent and perfect the way it was designed to flow when Enzo Ferrari's engineers built this machine in 1962. They drove in silence for 10 minutes. Robert's hands on the wheel were steady. His breathing was even. The tension that had carved lines into his face for 18 months was starting to ease. Then he spoke. "How did you learn all this? You're 20 years old. Most people your age can't change their own oil. You just diagnosed something that defeated master technicians across 3 continents." James thought about Joseph, about 5 years of emails, about a retired Ferrari engineer who'd taken the time to teach a stranger halfway around the world because he believed knowledge was meant to be shared, not hoarded. "I had a teacher who believed in me when nobody else did. He taught me that age doesn't matter, credentials don't matter. Only attention matters. Most people stop paying attention when they think they know enough. They start trusting their assumptions instead of their observations. They trust computers instead of their own senses." Robert nodded. His jaw was tight. 15 minutes into the drive, they reached the intersection at Pacific and Steiner, where the car had stalled 3 times in the past year, where Robert had sat in traffic with his hands shaking and his heart pounding, while drivers behind him honked and strangers yelled, and the engine refused to restart until it cooled down enough for the degraded fuel line to return to normal diameter. His hands tightened on the wheel. His breathing went shallow. The Ferrari climbed the hill, smooth, powerful, flawless. At the crest, Robert's grip relaxed. His breath came easier. They caught a red light near the top, sat idling while pedestrians crossed, and the city sprawled below them in afternoon light. Robert's hands started shaking, not from fear this time, from something else breaking open inside him. "My father taught me to drive in this car." The words came out rough, like something he'd been holding back too long. "Summer of 1972, I was 16. He sat where you're sitting now." James listened, didn't interrupt, didn't try to fill the silence. "We'd take it out on back roads in Marin County, early mornings before traffic. Just the two of us and this engine. He'd let me shift through the gears, feel the power, learn to trust the machine. Those were the best mornings of my life." His eyes stayed fixed forward. He died 2 years later, 1974, heart attack, 49 years old, collapsed in his office on a Tuesday afternoon. No warning, no goodbye, just gone. This car became the only place I could still reach him, the only place he felt real. The light turned green. Robert didn't move. A car behind them honked. He didn't seem to hear it. Then my son came along, Michael. I taught him to drive in this same car, same roads my father showed me, same lessons. Tried to give him what my father gave me. That connection, that trust, that feeling of being competent and confident and in control of something powerful and beautiful. His voice cracked. Drunk driver took him 15 years ago, coming home from college, 23 years old, his whole life ahead of him. Dead because someone else made a choice and Michael paid the price. The car behind them honked again, longer, angrier. Robert ignored it. When this car started failing, it felt like losing them both again, like even the memory of them was dying, like I was letting them down by not being able to save this last piece of what we shared. Tears rolled down the billionaire's face. He didn't wipe them away, didn't hide them, just let them fall. James understood loss. His father had died when James was 9. Construction accident, crushed by equipment that should have been inspected and wasn't, killed building something for someone else's profit. James barely remembered his face anymore. Just fragments. A laugh, strong hands, the smell of sawdust and coffee. But he remembered his mother's grief, still carried it, watched her carry it every day when she came home from the hospital with her feet swollen and her back aching and her eyes hollow from exhaustion that went deeper than physical tiredness. "Mr. Hayes, the car wasn't failing you. It was tired. And it needed someone who understood that tired doesn't mean dead. It just means something needs care, attention, someone willing to listen instead of just looking." Robert finally turned to look at him. This young black student who'd given him back something he'd thought was lost forever, who'd heard what a $70 million machine was trying to say when certified experts with decades of experience had heard nothing. His voice came out as a whisper. "You gave them back to me, James. Both of them." The light had cycled through twice. The car behind them pulled around, driver shouting something obscene through the window. Robert didn't notice. He was somewhere else. Somewhere in 1972 with his father, somewhere in 2009 with his son, somewhere in a present that had just reconnected with a past he'd thought was gone forever. He put the Ferrari in gear and drove. 35 minutes after leaving Ashford Prestige Motors, they returned. The engine had not stumbled once, had not hesitated, had not failed. For the first time in 18 months, the Ferrari 250 GTO ran exactly as it was meant to run. Robert parked the car in the service bay, sat motionless for a long moment. Then he turned to James and extended his hand, not downward the way adults address children, straight across, equal to equal. "Thank you, James, for listening when everyone else had stopped, for having the courage to speak when silence was safer, for giving me back my father and my son." James shook his hand. "They were never gone, sir. The car just needed the right person to hear what it was saying." The crowd inside had waited in tense silence. When Robert climbed out of the Ferrari, every eye fixed on his face. He was smiling, a real smile, the kind that comes from somewhere deep, the kind that says something fundamental has shifted. Linda Nash approached immediately. "Mr. Hayes, what are the results?" 35 minutes. Every road that broke this car before, every hill, every condition, not a single problem, not one hesitation. He paused. Let the words land. The student was right, about everything. The room erupted. Journalists shouting questions, cameras flashing, technicians whispering, Kenneth Porter taking notes. Brian Carter standing frozen with an expression like he'd just watched his entire understanding of the world collapse. Through it all, James stood quietly beside the Ferrari. His mother rushed forward from the corner and wrapped him in a hug that smelled like hospital antiseptic and the lavender lotion she used on her hands after every shift. "My baby," she was sobbing, laughing. "My brilliant, stubborn, impossible baby." Robert Hayes raised his voice over the chaos. "I'm establishing an educational endowment in James Collins's name. Full funding through doctorate level if he wants it. No conditions, no strings, just support for someone who's proven he deserves every opportunity education can provide." He turned to Patricia. "Mrs. Collins, I'd like to offer you a position as healthcare coordinator at Hayes Dynamics. Better hours than night shift nursing, better pay. A salary that means you never have to choose between rent and your son's future again." Patricia's hand flew to her mouth. Fresh tears streamed down her face. "James will have full access to my private collection. I have several other vintage vehicles that might benefit from his attention, and when he graduates from Berkeley, he'll have his choice of opportunities. Ferrari, General Motors. Or if he wants to start his own diagnostic firm, I'll provide the seed funding." Robert's voice went hard, formal. "And I'm commissioning an independent audit of every service performed on this car over the past 18 months. Every invoice, every diagnosis, every repair. If there was negligence or fraud, there will be consequences." Donald Ashford's face went pale. The color drained so fast he looked like he might pass out. Linda Nash was already moving. She approached Donald with a professional smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mr. Ashford, I'll need complete service records for Mr. Hayes's vehicle. Every diagnosis report, every repair invoice, every diagnostic procedure. Standard post-case review protocol." Donald's throat worked. "Of course. I'll have my assistant compile everything. Today, please." Her smile sharpened. Ferrari North America takes quality assurance very seriously, especially when a 20-year-old student solves in 90 minutes what your certified team couldn't resolve in 18 months. That raises questions about competence, or worse, about intent. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Donald saw his future crumbling, saw 18 months of lucrative billing about to be exposed, saw connections and reputation and everything he'd built on family money instead of actual skill circling the drain because a kid with a broom had made him look like a fraud. The journalists were already writing their stories. 20-year-old student exposes millions in failed repairs. Berkeley Engineering Jr. solves Ferrari mystery in 90 minutes. Automotive establishment humbled by untrained genius. Brian Carter stood motionless, watching his lead technician position evaporate, watching 15 years of certification and experience get outperformed by someone who'd learned from emails. The betting pool he'd started on how quickly James would fail was still written on the whiteboard in the break room. He'd bet on failure within 30 minutes. Marcus Chen approached James quietly. "I don't know if you're the bravest person I've ever met or the luckiest. Maybe both. But what you did today, that was something nobody's going to forget." James looked at the Ferrari, at Robert Hayes standing beside it with his hand on the fender like he was touching something sacred, at his mother crying tears of relief and pride and exhaustion, at Linda Nash already on her phone arranging James's internship placement, at Kenneth Porter writing down James's contact information for future recruitment. 45 minutes ago, he'd been a detail technician making $15 an hour with no future and no prospects, and a mother working herself to death to keep him in school. Now he had a full scholarship, a guaranteed internship, job offers from Ferrari and GM, and the knowledge that when he'd been tested under pressure with everything on the line, he'd proven worthy of the faith that Joseph Martinelli had invested in him 5 years ago. The clock on the wall showed 10:47 a.m. The entire evaluation had taken 93 minutes, 3 minutes over the limit. Nobody cared. Donald Ashford left the room without another word, walked to his office, closed the door, sat at his desk and stared at the wall while the sound of celebration filtered through and his phone began ringing with calls from luxury automotive brands demanding explanations for 18 months of failed diagnostics. In the service bay, Robert Hayes stood with his hand on the Ferrari and his eyes closed, listening to the crowd, listening to his own breathing, listening to the memory of his father's voice teaching him to trust the machine, listening to the echo of his son's laughter on back roads in 1995 when the world was young and death was something that happened to other people. The car was alive. His father was alive in it. His son was alive in it. And a 20-year-old kid from Oakland had given him back something more valuable than $4 billion could buy. James caught his mother's eye across the room. She mouthed 2 words, "Your father." And James understood. His father had died speaking truth to power, had died because someone ignored a problem they didn't want to hear about, had died building something he believed in. Today, James had lived by doing the same thing, had spoken truth even when silence was safer, had listened when everyone else was shouting, had proven that knowledge and attention and humility mattered more than credentials and connections, and the assumption that young black students from Oakland didn't belong in rooms where $70 million problems got solved. Machines don't lie. They tell truth to those patient enough to listen. Joseph Martinelli had written that in an email 5 years ago. James had just proven it in front of everyone who'd assumed he didn't belong. The audit began that same afternoon. Linda Nash didn't waste time. She requisitioned a conference room at Ashford Prestige Motors and started pulling files while Donald watched his empire begin its collapse in real time. 18 months of service records, 247 invoices, diagnostic reports spanning 3 countries and 5 service centers. Every document Donald had generated to justify charging Robert Hayes enough money to buy a house. Linda spread them across the table in chronological order, started reading. Her expression shifted from professional skepticism to controlled fury within the first 30 minutes. James sat in the corner of the room at Linda's request. She wanted him there as technical consultant, wanted his eyes on the procedures Donald claimed to have performed, wanted his assessment of whether the work matched the charges. The first red flag appeared in month 3. Invoice for comprehensive fuel system rebuild, $48,000. Labor hours claimed, 62. Parts replaced. Fuel pump, fuel filter, pressure regulator, injector rebuild kit. Linda pulled up the diagnostic notes, read them aloud. Complete fuel delivery system overhaul performed, all components tested and replaced to factory specification. System pressure verified at 4.5 pounds per square inch, sustained. Problem resolved. She looked at James. Your assessment? James had reviewed the same records while preparing for the evaluation, had seen this invoice and felt his stomach turn. The original fuel line was never touched, never inspected. If they'd actually rebuilt the fuel system comprehensively, they would have replaced every line as standard procedure. That's basic protocol for a complete rebuild. Linda made a note. Moved to the next invoice. Month 6, ignition timing assembly rebuild, $92,000. Labor claimed, 88 hours. Components replaced, distributor, ignition coil, spark plug wires, timing gear. Diagnostic notes. Complete ignition system replacement. Timing verified to factory specification. Test drive completed with no issues detected. James flipped through the technical specifications. The timing gear replacement alone would require partial engine disassembly, minimum 4 days of work. But look at the service bay logs. He pointed to the timestamp records. The car was only in the shop for 18 hours during that billing period. Linda's jaw tightened. She pulled out her phone and photographed the discrepancy. By hour 2, the pattern was undeniable. Procedures billed but never performed. Labor hours that didn't match shop records. Components charged as defective that later testing proved functional. Diagnostic fees for analysis that computer logs showed never happened. Either Donald Ashford was catastrophically incompetent, or he'd been running a systematic fraud operation for 18 months, maybe longer. Linda called Ferrari North America headquarters, put the phone on speaker. "I need you to initiate formal complaint proceedings against Ashford Prestige Motors. I'm documenting evidence of fraudulent billing in excess of $2 million on a single client account. I want legal team and compliance involved immediately." The voice on the other end went quiet. Then, "Understood. We'll begin notification to other luxury automotive brands. If this is systematic, there may be additional victims." Linda hung up and looked at James. "You didn't just diagnose a car problem. You exposed 18 months of fraud, possibly years of it. Do you understand what that means?" James understood. It meant Donald Ashford's career was over. It meant criminal charges. It meant every wealthy client who'd ever trusted Ashford Motors was about to demand audits of their own service records. It meant the luxury automotive establishment in Northern California was about to tear itself apart, looking for how deep the corruption went. It means a $40 fuel line is about to cost someone their freedom. Linda smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. "Yes, it does." 3 hours into the audit, Patricia appeared in the doorway, still in her nurse's scrubs from the morning shift, hair pulled back, eyes red from crying earlier but clear now. "Baby, we need to go. Landlord called. Says there's an emergency with the apartment." James stood. Linda waved him off. "Go. I have what I need. I'll be in touch about your internship placement." Mother and son walked to the parking lot in silence, got into James's Honda Civic, the car that Patricia had almost lost 2 years ago when the transmission failed, and James had fixed it with a toothbrush and electrical tape and knowledge gleaned from library books. Patricia didn't start talking until they were on the Bay Bridge heading back to Oakland. "I lied. There's no emergency with the apartment." James looked at her. "Mama, I needed to get you out of there. Needed to get you somewhere we could talk without cameras and journalists and people treating you like you're some kind of miracle." She gripped the steering wheel. "Because you're not a miracle, James. You're my son. And I need to know you understand what just happened." They drove in silence for a mile. Then Patricia pulled off into a rest stop overlooking the bay, parked, turned off the engine. "You stood in front of the most powerful people in California's automotive industry and proved they were wrong. You made a billionaire cry. You exposed fraud that's probably going to send someone to prison. And you're 20 years old, Black, and until this morning you were washing cars for $15 an hour." She turned to face him. "Do you know what that makes you now?" James didn't answer. "It makes you a target. It makes you someone people will either want to own or want to destroy. That job offer from Ferrari, that scholarship from Robert Hayes, those aren't gifts, baby. They're investments, and people who invest in you will expect returns." Her voice was fierce, protective. "Your father spoke truth to power once, told his foreman that construction site wasn't safe, got ignored, went back to work anyway because we needed the money. And he died. Do you understand? He chose truth over safety, and it killed him." James felt tears burning. "I'm not Dad." "No. You're smarter than he was, more careful. But you have his same stubborn need to be right, even when being right is dangerous." She reached out and gripped his face. "I can't lose you too. I won't survive it." "You won't lose me, Mama." "Promise me something. Promise me you'll be careful, that you'll remember that being right doesn't make you bulletproof, that you'll watch your back with these people who are suddenly so interested in helping you." James promised. Meant it. Understood that his mother's fear came from a place of love and loss, and the bone-deep knowledge that the world wasn't fair, and being brilliant didn't protect you from being destroyed. They sat in the car for 20 minutes, watching sailboats cross the bay, watching the city glitter in afternoon sun, watching the future unfold in front of them in ways neither could fully predict. When they finally drove home, there were 3 news vans parked outside their apartment building. The story had gone viral. 20-year-old Berkeley student solves $70 million Ferrari mystery in 90 minutes. Untrained genius exposes millions in automotive fraud. David versus Goliath. How one kid with email beat the experts. James's phone had 43 missed calls. Voicemails from journalists wanting interviews, from automotive companies wanting to hire him, from Berkeley wanting to issue a press release, from people he'd gone to high school with suddenly remembering they'd been friends. He turned off his phone, went inside, locked the door, sat at the kitchen table while his mother made coffee and the world outside tried to break down the barriers between who he'd been yesterday and who everyone wanted him to be tomorrow. 4 days later, Brian Carter showed up at James's apartment. 7 in the morning. Saturday. James answered the door in sweatpants and a Berkeley t-shirt, hair uncombed, eyes still blurry from sleep. Brian stood in the hallway looking like he'd aged a decade, unshaven, rumpled, hands shoved deep in his pockets. "Can I come in?" James almost said no. This was the man who'd mocked him, who'd called him affirmative action, who'd started a betting pool on how quickly he'd fail, who'd spent 15 years building a career on certifications instead of competence and resented anyone who threatened that comfortable worldview. But Joseph's voice echoed, "Knowledge should be shared, not hoarded. Everyone deserves a chance to learn." James stepped aside. Brian entered the small apartment, looked around at the threadbare furniture and peeling paint, and the general atmosphere of people living one emergency away from homelessness. This was what $15 an hour bought in Oakland. This was what night shift nursing wages supported. This was real life for people without safety nets. Brian sat at the kitchen table. James made coffee. Neither spoke until the mugs were full, and the silence had stretched from awkward to unbearable. "I've been turning wrenches for 16 years. Brian's voice was rough. "Thought I was good at this. Thought I understood engines. Thought my certifications meant something." He wrapped his hands around the coffee mug like he needed the warmth. "You made me realize I stopped learning the day I got certified, started trusting computers instead of my own judgment, started believing that credentials meant I didn't have to keep paying attention." James waited. "I mocked you, called you affirmative action in front of everyone, assumed you didn't belong because you're young and black and didn't have the right paperwork to make me comfortable." Brian looked up, met James's eyes. "I was wrong. About everything. And I'm sorry." The apology hung between them. James could accept it gracefully, could brush it off, could hold the grudge and let Brian twist in his guilt. Or he could do what Joseph would do. "I know I don't deserve anything from you, but I'm asking anyway. Would you teach me how to listen the way you do, how to pay attention instead of just following diagnostic protocols?" James thought about the 5 years Joseph had spent teaching him through emails, hundreds of hours explaining theory and methodology and the art of humility, all of it given freely to a stranger who'd asked good questions and shown willingness to learn. That knowledge wasn't James's to hoard. It was a gift that multiplied when shared. Saturday mornings, 8 a.m. "I'm working on a friend's Alfa Romeo in my building's parking garage. You can help. But you start at the beginning. No assumptions, no ego. Just attention." Brian nodded. "Thank you. I'll be there." He stood to leave, paused at the door. "Donald's finished, you know." Ferrari pulled their certification. 3 other brands followed. State Attorney General opened a criminal investigation. They're estimating $8 million in fraudulent billing across 47 clients over 5 years. James felt a sick twist in his stomach. He'd exposed the fraud, hadn't meant to destroy someone's entire life, just wanted to fix a car, help a man reconnect with his father and son, do the right thing because staying silent felt like cowardice. "You didn't do this to him." Brian seemed to read his thoughts. He did it to himself. You just turned on the lights. The rot was always there. After Brian left, James sat at the table with his coffee going cold. Thought about how one moment could cascade into consequences nobody predicted. How $40 worth of rubber could trigger criminal charges and fraud investigations and career destructions. How being right carried responsibilities that being wrong never did. His phone buzzed. Email from Joseph. Subject line, "Congratulations, my student." James opened it. "I have read the news articles, seen the videos, watched you prove everything I taught you about diagnosis and humility and the courage to speak truth. I am proud beyond words. But I must remind you, this is not the end of your education. This is the beginning. You have shown you can solve problems. Now you must learn to live with the consequences of your solutions. Fame is seductive. Power is corrupting. Success can make you forget the lessons that earned it. Remember why you learned this craft. Not to be impressive, not to be famous, not to prove yourself superior, but to help machines communicate with humans who care about them. Stay humble, stay curious, stay worthy of the trust people place in you. The world will try to change you now. Don't let it. You are exactly who you need to be. Joseph." James read it 3 times, printed it, pinned it to the wall beside his desk where he'd see it every morning. 1 week later, Robert Hayes invited James to his estate in Atherton. 40 acres of manicured grounds, a main house that looked like something from a magazine, and a private garage that held 15 vintage automobiles worth a combined $300 million. Robert met him at the garage entrance. Looked different than he had at the evaluation. Younger somehow, lighter, like 18 months of weight had lifted. "I wanted you to see something." He led James inside. The Ferrari 250 GTO sat in the center bay, polished, perfect, the new fuel line installed professionally, the engine singing at idle with a sound that was pure mechanical joy. "I've driven it every day this week, back roads in Marin County, same routes my father showed me, same curves, same views." Robert's voice was steady, but his eyes were bright. "For the first time in 15 years, I can drive this car without fear, without dread, without waiting for it to fail me." He walked to the Ferrari and placed his palm on the hood. "You didn't just fix a car, James. You gave me back my father and my son. Gave me back memories I thought were dying. Gave me back trust in something I'd lost faith in." Robert turned. "I want to show you something else." He led James to the back of the garage, pulled a cloth off another car, a 1968 Alfa Romeo GTV. Dusty, neglected, sitting on flat tires with an engine that probably hadn't run in a decade. "This belonged to my father. He bought it the same year he bought the Ferrari. Drove it on weekends. Loved it almost as much. I haven't touched it since he died because I didn't trust anyone to work on it properly. Didn't want anyone's incompetence to destroy the last piece of him I hadn't already lost." Robert looked at James. "I trust you. I want you to restore this. Take your time. Do it right. And when it's running again, we'll drive it together on the roads my father loved." The offer carried weight beyond the mechanical work. This was about legacy, about generational trust, about passing knowledge and memory forward instead of watching it die. "I'll do it, sir. But I want to bring Brian Carter with me. He's learning, needs practice, needs someone to show him how to pay attention instead of just following protocols." Robert smiled. "Your teacher in Italy would approve of that. Knowledge multiplies when shared." They spent 3 hours in the garage, Robert showing James his collection, telling stories about each car, where he'd bought it, why it mattered, what memories lived in the leather and chrome and engine sound. At 5 p.m., Robert walked James to his Honda Civic parked between a Bugatti and a Lamborghini. "The endowment is established. Full funding through PhD if you want it. No strings. I've also set up a trust for your mother. Enough that she can retire from nursing if she wants, or cut back to part-time, or just have the security of knowing one medical emergency won't destroy you both." James felt his throat tighten. "Sir, you don't need to. Yes, I do. You gave me back something priceless. This is the only way I know to say thank you that matches the scale of the gift." Robert extended his hand. "You're going to do great things, James. In automotive, in engineering, in whatever field you choose, because you understand something most people never learn. Competence matters more than credentials, attention matters more than assumptions, and humility is the foundation of all real wisdom." They shook hands. Then James drove home through Atherton and Palo Alto and across the bay to Oakland, from mansions to apartments, from wealth to struggle, from the world he'd just been granted access to and the world he'd always known. The distance between them was more than miles. Berkeley campus felt different when James returned for fall semester. People recognized him, pointed, whispered. The kid who'd embarrassed certified experts and exposed fraud and proven that genius doesn't require permission. Professor Morrison called James into his office the first week. The same professor who'd sent an email telling him not to participate in the evaluation, who'd warned that failure would embarrass the department. Morrison sat behind his desk with James's transcript open in front of him. "I owe you an apology. I assumed you'd fail, assumed you were in over your head, assumed that participating in that evaluation was arrogance rather than confidence." He closed the transcript. "I was wrong. You demonstrated diagnostic methodology that I've seen from PhD candidates, proved that real-world problem-solving requires more than textbook knowledge. You made this department look good, and I almost prevented it from happening." Morrison pulled out a form. "I'm recommending you for the Departmental Honors Program, Advanced Research Track, direct mentorship with faculty, if you're interested." James took the form, looked at it, thought about Joseph's warning. Fame is seductive. Power is corrupting. Success can make you forget the lessons that earned it. "I'm interested, sir, but I need to keep working. Real problems, real cars, real people who need help. Can't let academic success disconnect me from why I learned this in the first place." Morrison nodded. "Then we'll structure the program to support that. Independent study credit for your restoration work. Research thesis based on practical diagnosis methodology. Use what you know to bridge theory and application." Over the next 6 months, James's life transformed in ways that felt both surreal and inevitable. Ferrari North America brought him to their Heritage Division headquarters in New Jersey for a week-long intensive. Master technicians who'd worked on Formula One cars teaching him factory secrets. Engineers who'd designed legendary machines sharing knowledge that wasn't in any manual. 3 generations of Ferrari expertise compressed into 5 days of brutal, beautiful education. General Motors flew him to Detroit, offered him a summer internship position in their Advanced Diagnostics Division. Salary that made his mother cry when he told her the number. Benefits that included housing and relocation assistance and health insurance that actually covered things. Berkeley promoted him to teaching assistant for the Advanced Automotive Systems course. Let him design laboratory exercises based on real diagnostic challenges. Gave him authority to grade assignments and mentor undergraduates who were older than him but less experienced where it mattered. And every Saturday morning at 8 a.m., Brian Carter showed up at James's apartment building. They'd work on the Alfa Romeo in the parking garage, Brian learning to listen instead of just testing, learning to pay attention instead of trusting computers, learning humility the hard way through mistakes and corrections and the slow realization that 15 years of certifications had taught him protocols without wisdom. Other technicians started joining them. Marcus Chen from Ashford Motors, a woman named Sarah who'd been fired from a dealership for questioning a senior tech's diagnosis. 2 recent automotive school graduates who'd heard about James and wanted to learn from someone who understood that machines spoke a language that required patience to hear. The parking garage became a classroom. James became a teacher. The knowledge Joseph had given him freely began multiplying through people who'd take it further than James alone ever could. In February, 9 months after the evaluation, Donald Ashford pleaded guilty to wire fraud and consumer protection violations. 47 counts. $8.3 million in fraudulent billing across 5 years. The judge sentenced him to 6 years in federal prison and ordered full restitution to his victims. James watched the sentencing on the news, felt no satisfaction, no vindication, just a hollow awareness that one person's greed had cost dozens of people millions of dollars and destroyed whatever good work Donald might have done before he'd started cutting corners and billing for services never performed. Don't let it. Patricia sat beside him on the couch. Don't let his choices become your burden. You showed the truth. What people did with that truth was on them, not you. But James couldn't fully release the weight. Couldn't stop thinking about how different things might have been if Donald had just been honest. If he'd admitted he didn't know instead of pretending competence he didn't possess. If he'd asked for help instead of covering failure with fraud. How many lives would be different if people could admit when they didn't know something? 1 year after the evaluation, Joseph Martinelli called on the phone. First time James had ever heard his voice in real time instead of through emails or occasional voice messages. James, my boy, I have news. I am retiring from email correspondence, 77 years old. Time to rest these old hands and let younger minds carry the knowledge forward. James felt panic rise. Joseph, I still need... You don't need me anymore. You never really did. I just gave you permission to trust what you already knew. The old man's voice was warm, content. But I have a request. I have 17 other students around the world. Young people learning diagnosis through correspondence. Some are talented, some are struggling. All deserve attention. He paused. I want you to take over their training. Become their teacher as I was yours. Pass forward what was given to you freely. James thought about the parking garage, about Brian and Marcus and Sarah and the others who showed up every Saturday wanting to learn, about how knowledge multiplied when shared instead of hoarded. I'll do it, Joseph, I promise. Good. Then my work is complete. You were my best student, James, not because you were smartest, because you understood that knowing things meant nothing if you didn't use knowledge to help people. Stay worthy of that understanding. They talked for another hour, Joseph telling stories about his years at Scuderia Ferrari, the cars he'd worked on, the drivers he'd known, the mistakes he'd made and lessons he'd learned, the regrets that came from keeping knowledge to himself for too long before realizing it was meant to be shared. When they finally hung up, James sat in his apartment, bigger now, nicer building, paid for by the trust fund Robert Hayes had established, and thought about the chain of knowledge that connected him to Joseph, to the engineers at Ferrari, to Enzo Ferrari himself, to every person who'd ever understood that machines and humans could communicate if both were willing to listen. That chain didn't end with James. It passed through him to Brian and Sarah and 17 students around the world, and everyone they would teach and everyone those people would teach in an infinite multiplication of attention and humility and the courage to speak truth even when silence was safer. Berkeley graduation came in May. James walked across the stage in cap and gown with a 3.9 GPA and a mechanical engineering degree that had cost him 4 years of midnight study sessions and part-time jobs and the constant weight of proving he deserved to be there. Patricia sat in the audience crying. Robert Hayes sat beside her. Linda Nash flew in from New Jersey. Kenneth Porter sent a congratulatory letter and a job offer from GM. Joseph sent an email with just 3 words. I am proud. After graduation, James stood in the parking lot with his mother and Robert, and the knowledge that 24 months ago he'd been a detail technician making $15 an hour with no future and no prospects. Now he had job offers from Ferrari and GM. Had a PhD program waiting if he wanted it. Had 17 students around the world learning diagnosis through his guidance. Had a parking garage full of people showing up every Saturday to learn how to listen. And he had a 1968 Alfa Romeo GTV sitting in Robert Hayes's garage, waiting to be restored. A car that belonged to a man who'd died in 1974 and lived on in memory and metal, and the trust that his son placed in a 22-year-old who understood that machines weren't just assemblies of parts, they were connections between people across time and loss and love. What happens now? Patricia asked. Ferrari? GM? PhD program? You could do anything, baby. James thought about it. Thought about Joseph's warning that success could make you forget why you started. Thought about his father dying because someone chose profit over truth. Thought about Robert Hayes crying in a Ferrari because someone finally listened. I'm going to start my own diagnostic consulting firm. Small, independent, working on cars that matter to people who care about them. Training technicians who want to learn the right way. Building something that values competence over credentials and attention over assumptions. Robert smiled. I'll fund it. Consider it my investment in making sure knowledge gets passed forward properly. And I'll work with you. Brian had appeared from the crowd. If you'll have me, I've learned more in your parking garage than I did in 15 years of certifications. Want to keep learning? James looked at his mother. She was smiling through tears. Your father would be so proud. You're building something he believed in, something honest, something that helps people. They stood together in afternoon sun, mother and son and billionaire and reformed technician and the ghost of an old man in Italy who'd believed that knowledge was meant to be shared, all of them connected by the understanding that machines spoke truth to those patient enough to listen and that wisdom mattered more than credentials. 2 years later, Collins Diagnostic opened its doors in Oakland. Small shop, 6 bays, a team of 8 technicians who'd all learned in James's parking garage. A philosophy built on attention and humility and the courage to say, I don't know, when you didn't know, instead of pretending competence you hadn't earned. The shop specialized in vintage vehicles, cars that mattered to people, machines that carried memories and stories and connections across generations, work that required patience and knowledge and the understanding that a $40 fuel line could be worth more than millions if it gave someone back their father and son. James stood in the shop on opening day, 24 years old, business owner, teacher, inheritor of knowledge from Joseph Martinelli and Enzo Ferrari, and every person who'd ever understood that machines and humans spoke the same language if both paid attention. On the wall hung a framed quote in elegant script. Machines don't lie. They tell truth to those patient enough to listen. The only question is whether you're humble enough to hear. The first customer was Robert Hayes, driving the 1968 Alfa Romeo GT5 that James had spent 8 months restoring. The car running perfectly, sounding exactly the way it had in 1968 when Robert's father drove it on weekend mornings through Marin County. Robert parked and climbed out, looked at the shop, at the team James had assembled, at the philosophy written on the wall. Your teacher would be proud. You took what he gave you and made it bigger, better, more generous than keeping it for yourself. James thought about Joseph, about 5 years of emails from a stranger who'd believed in him, about knowledge passed forward freely without expectation of return, about how wisdom multiplied when shared instead of hoarded. He taught me that being right means nothing if you don't use it to help people, that competence without humility is just arrogance, that the purpose of learning is to pass knowledge forward so it grows instead of dying with you. Robert handed James the keys to the Alfa Romeo. It needs its first oil change since the restoration. Figured you'd want to do it yourself. Make sure everything's still perfect. James took the keys, felt their weight, felt the responsibility of maintaining something precious that connected a son to his dead father, felt the privilege of being trusted with memories disguised as machinery. I'll take care of it, sir. That's what we do here. We listen, we pay attention, we treat every car like it matters because to someone it does. And that was the truth that mattered more than credentials or fame or success. The truth that James Collins had learned from Joseph Martinelli, who'd learned it from engineers at Scuderia Ferrari, who'd learned it from Enzo Ferrari, who'd understood that machines were more than metal and rubber and moving parts. They were conversations between humans across time. They were memories made tangible. They were connections that refused to die even when people did. All you had to do was be humble enough to listen,